We have everybody that needs to be here. Damon, are we waiting for anybody else?
I don't see Phil, but I don't know, was he at council?
Yes, he was.
I think that's all we're missing.
Well, he may or may not join us, but I don't want to leave our guests waiting, so let's call the meeting to order. And I think we just go right to our new business, which is the presentation of the market revitalization plan by Heirs Associates. Are they ready to present?
I think so. Holly, do we have to take roll call for these or no?
It's usual, yes.
For a call? Okay.
Boersma? Is Alder Boersma on the line? Caravello? Doom?
Here.
Hiley?
Here.
Hirsch?
Here?
Hunt?
Here.
Jensen?
Here.
Lagaki?
Here.
Majewski?
Here.
Reeves?
Here.
Schumacher?
Here.
And then was Boersma here? And Caravello. All right, there are 9 alders present.
Yeah, and I also count as committee of the whole.
Oh, sorry, Mayor Swadley.
It's okay. In case
There are
anybody.
10 people present.
Okay, so we're here for one reason and one reason only, and that's to go through the presentation. Just due to kind of the inherent nature of remote meetings in these times of COVID, especially for presentations similar to these, we'll kind of lay some ground rules here. I think to begin with, after I kind of go through the ground rules, I will turn it over to Denise Franzik maybe to give just a real brief history of how this project came to be, and then introduce Heirs Associates to go over the results. During the presentation for members of the public, I do request, and council members as well, if you're not speaking, please mute your microphones so we don't get additional feedback. The Q&A session, I think we're gonna have to handle a couple different ways. I do ask that during the presentation piece itself, that only council members ask questions or make comments in real time. Following the completion of the presentation, then we'll kind of open it up for the Q&A for the general public. If you're joining us online, you should be able to see on the top right-hand corner of your screen something that looks like a chat bubble. So I'm going to ask that throughout the presentation, if you have questions, comments, go ahead and just type it within that chat. I'll be monitoring that, and then at the end of the presentation, we'll go through those questions first, and then we'll open it up to the folks on the phone. That may get a little clunky, but we'll kind of deal with that as best we can. Does that make sense for everybody? Anybody have any questions about that? Okay. We're going to be switching between a couple different presenters tonight, so just kind of bear with us as we work through the technicalities of that, but hopefully this all goes pretty smooth. With that, Denise, do you just want to say a couple words about the project?
Well, I think that reviewing their presentation actually gives people a pretty good idea of the beginning to the end of the project. This was originally initiated by the RDA through a resolution, and the city council then approved the resolution and funding, along with the RDA approving the committee members. And from there, we selected Heirs and did the presentation with everything that they've done. I know I and the committee have been very pleased with the interactions and the results that we've gotten. And I think that should do it.
Okay, so we have Bruce Morrow, Diane Williams, and Amanda Arnold from Heirs. Bruce, who is going to be presenting first?
Amanda will start us off, followed by Diane, who's actually from PI,
Okay.
and then I will end the presentation.
Okay, Amanda, there's going to be a little pop-up. I'm going to make you the presenter. It'll ask you to share your screen, and then we can kind of just go through the presentation as is.
Okay, great. And I'm having a few connectivity issues. I hope it's not getting perceived on your end. You guys are a little choppy for me. So I will just walk through that. Okay, so I am sharing my screen now. And okay, so you guys have the presentation, is that correct? Can everybody see that?
We do see it. It's kind of showing your notes and everything.
Yeah, that doesn't look right on my screen. It is not. So let me see if I can get it to my other screen. Let me see if I can change that. Bear with me for just a minute. Bruce, do you know how for me to get my notes off?
I would think you just hit the full screen presentation. It doesn't work if you just hit the full screen presentation mode. Try to run the presentation through my machine. I have a separate machine I can use.
Okay.
Do you have 2 different desktops you can choose? Can you choose your other desktop?
What's that?
You choose your other desktop?
I am trying to do that. Yeah, maybe this is it. No. Okay. Well, would it be possible for us to switch from me being in control to Bruce being in control? Because he's got the presentation up and he can show it without the notes.
Under display settings, you can swap your monitors at the top of the screen.
Okay. 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 How's that? Much better?
Got it.
Looks better on my end. What's that?
Yep, looks good.
Okay, great. Okay, let's kick it off then. So, thank you all. Again, I'm Amanda Arnold. I'm an urban planner at Heirs and Associates, and I am happy to be involved in this presentation. My role in the presentation is that I am going to review the process and the community input that was received. Turn it over to Diane, who will talk about the market analysis and the recommendations that came out of that. And then Bruce will follow up with the physical improvements and the subsequent recommendations, and then we can all discuss next steps. As Denise mentioned, this process started a while back and was initiated from a request from the Redevelopment Authority. The kickoff actually happened a little bit more than a year ago in July of 2019. And it's very important to note that the majority of this process happened before COVID hit us all. And that may be part of the reason we're here expected on this original timeline. Our public input meeting, this meeting was expected to be a little earlier, but the majority of the work was done in the last half of 2019 and the beginning of 2020. And there were a series of ways that public input was gathered during that time, and that's what I'm going to walk you through right now. First, one thing that I think was a really good thing that helped organize the plan was that the plan objectives were pretty clear from the beginning, and they were to solicit input and collect feedback. There was a lot of public involvement, and to identify strategies and opportunities for economic development for the downtown businesses. And lastly, to focus on the eastern end of Main Street and the economic opportunities and the physical improvements for that area. Community input was gathered in 4 different ways. There were stakeholder interviews and focus groups, There was an online survey and a community meeting that happened approximately a year ago. And I will walk through kind of the overview of what happened at those meetings and the information that was gathered, but it's all detailed out in the appendices for the document. And so certainly if you want more information, if you really want to dig into the questions, for example, that were part of the online survey, that's all available to you. But today I'm going to just kind of hit the highlights. For the stakeholder groups and interviews, there were 8 meetings that were held, and people involved in those were property owners, residents, local officials, major employers, arts organizations, and event organizers. Input was gathered and collected into a series of topics that I will touch on at the end of this when I'll convey kind of the summary of all of the input that was heard through these various outreach mechanisms. For the online survey, there were over 1,000 responses. I think that's really impressive. It was an 18-question survey, and it was focused on getting people's preferences about downtown and then to inform them about the process. 86% of the responses came from the Stoughton area code. So again, great local feedback in the online survey. As I mentioned, the community meeting was, I think it was October 19th of 2019, so coming up on a year ago. The way that was set up was that there were 5 stations that people could go to and give their input on different topics. Over 50 people participated, and I want to walk through what the different stations were so you understand the input that was gathered. There was a values board where people were asked what they value about downtown, and people's input was tallied throughout these different exercises. And the topic or adjective that rose to the top in the values board was vibrant. There was also a visioning board where people were asked to express what their hopes for downtown, and new businesses was the catchphrase that rose to the top from the vision board. There was also a visual preference survey station where people were shown different images of downtowns, and there was a definite preference for a traditional downtown, 2 3-story buildings with street trees and buildings up to the street. Then there was an open comment section where people could comment on a variety of topics, and these included, they were somewhat focused, but they included parking, signage, streetscape, artscape, new businesses, housing, and parks. Lastly, there was a station where people were asked to put dots on a map, and they were asked what parts of downtown they felt were good or where they felt comfortable, areas that were successful. And so as you can see on this map, along Main Street, there are 3 big blobs just to get you oriented. The Opera House is right here. But as you move farther away from Main Street, those feelings became more mixed. And then the red areas indicate areas where the participants felt that there was a need for improvements, either through business development or physical improvements. So through these different exercises, there was definitely, there were themes that came out of them. And I think what's most important is that everyone who was involved was very passionate about downtown, but they did feel that there were improvements that could be made. They wanted to see downtown more vibrant, more active, diverse, accessible, and generally a little more attractive. They felt that downtown needed to be more welcoming, and that there was more collaboration that was needed in order to achieve that, particularly between the public and private entities in the community. And there needed to be more definition around the roles for those 2 groups. They did feel that residents and visitors were both patronizing downtown businesses, but they did feel that improving the appearance of downtown was necessary and would need to be a joint effort between all the people who are involved in downtown. And lastly, business hours were raised as a real concern, and we can talk about that more, perhaps in the market study section, or at least at the comments at the end. So with that, I will turn it over to Diane to talk about the market analysis.
Okay. Can you see my screen here?
Ken?
Okay, great. Is it full screen or is it just the,
I don't see
I'm
it at
not
all.
seeing it for some. Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'm seeing my own screen.
okay, have we switched presenters?
Yeah, you should have received a pop-up, Diane, because you have to get
Oh,
permission to
just-
share your screen.
Okay. I think I'm having some firewall issues here. Okay, can you maybe try that again? Because it's not showing up.
Diane, if you get too stuck, I now have it, or I still have. the
Okay.
presentation.
What we
Peter.
may do just to keep things going is doing that, because I think I'm having a firewall problem. So, so anyway, the market analysis itself really consisted of 5 key components. The initial part of that was obviously looking at the local markets, including and the logical markets for downtown Stoughton, the business mix and the broader market trends that really are affecting not only downtown Stoughton, but all of downtowns in general. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about the trends themselves in a minute. The owner and stakeholder input was really important. And in addition to that, providing some basic background, the other participants that Amanda mentioned, such as the arts organization, the event organizers, and some of the local officials that I talked to, really provided important additional context to really get a sense of what the conditions were in downtown Stoughton. The online survey process and the results were really important for guiding our market work, and overall, as Amanda mentioned, it was really a very successful process. Just as a point of reference, when compared to the other BDI surveys that we've done in the last few years for communities of similar size to Stoughton, you guys essentially had the second most number of respondents, which is really terrific, because these results really provide important guidance for the process as a whole. In terms of other things that we looked at, checking out the real estate market and what that represented in terms of rental rates, the links between what sales are needed to support local rents, and the fact that downtown Stoughton has a significant number of owner-occupied buildings is really part of an important component to the analysis. And then finally, really to take a look at what other communities are doing. Success transfer is actually a big component of downtown work, and a number of communities, particularly Main Street communities, refer to it as rip-off and duplicate or R&D, and it's really very important. But the focus of the best practices review for Stoughton was really to understand how those downtowns organize their work and the types of programming that they do and develop and have developed over time that have really been successful, that can potentially provide guidance. And if you can, next slide, please.
Sure.
In summarizing downtown's market, there are a couple of overriding issues that you may want to keep in mind. First and foremost, and this was mentioned a number of times in the report itself, is that downtown does have a significant number of assets. There are strong businesses there. You have historic character. You have regional draws like the Opera House. And the downtown as a commercial district really has the opportunity to compete effectively within a larger and growing regional market. And that's important because there aren't a lot of markets in the Midwest, and trust me, I know this, that are growing. So that's really an advantage. The other thing is, I think, recognizing over time how Stoughton has changed and what those changes represent for how downtown is functioning now and can function in the future. Overall, the market can be summarized really into three categories of issues. And one of them has to do with collaboration. And this takes on a number of different aspects. And this really applies to public and private sector interests. And both sectors need to be involved, and their roles will be necessary going forward and important to success. During the pandemic, in lots of towns, there have been a lot of collaborations on new initiatives just within the business community themselves, and many of them have also been supported by city and local government entities. You know, one of the examples that I came across was actually your series of events and promotions last weekend, and that's a good example. And there have been clever examples all around the country in terms of how collaborations are beginning as part of this process, and keeping up that kind of work is going to be important going forward. I think the key thing too, related to the whole issue of collaboration, is going to be communication between the two sectors. And I'll talk a little bit more about roles and responsibilities as we're going forward. But the reality is all of you need to be talking to each other, and success going forward is going to be dependent upon that and the ability to collaborate among all downtown interests. Adapting to market change really has become even more critical since the advent of the pandemic. And it has accelerated really market trends in general across all uses. Probably the biggest example of disruption and accelerated trend and change is within the restaurant sector. And I think most of you are aware that nationally, the restaurant operating model is being questioned by industry leaders. And how that is going to shake out going forward is going to be interesting. Restaurants individually have been forced to pivot to generate revenues. They're dealing with issues of customer concerns about personal safety. There have been high-profile closures, moves to downtown locations, and new and interesting concepts have even, come up as part of that, and are really emerging, and that's really one of the opportunities going forward. I mean, kind of as an example for Stoughton in particular, you have the move by the cidery coming to the downtown, and those kinds of things have been happening for food and beverage businesses nationally, actually. Technology will continue to play a central role when we're talking about market growth and market development. A lot of businesses, particularly at this point, retailers that may have resisted online sales in the past, are now working quickly to establish those channels and really get those running, and identify the kinds of media that they need to support their growth. Related to all of this, operating practices, Amanda mentioned hours, and that's something that all businesses are going to be examining going forward, will become even more important. And related to hours is, how do you facilitate sales growth with things like curbside pickup, like delivery, and perhaps on an interim basis, in-store appointments for selling are things that are going to need to be considered going forward. The whole issue of being welcoming to all really kind of supports these changes. One of the things that was really great in the survey was how enthusiastic local residents are about downtown and downtown's prospects. And I think that they want to make sure that downtown Stoughton is great for all. And that's going to be a key thing going forward. Another, and probably from a long-term perspective, the thing that may be most important in terms of an issue category is supporting small business growth. For downtown Stoughton, it continues to represent really an important strategy with a whole series of steps over the next few years. This is noted in detail in the recommendations on the next slide, but beginning now to develop a system that's going to support this kind of growth is going to be really crucial going forward. And these resources, when marshaled, are going to be something that's going to really help with business attraction and expansion and ultimately formal recruitment. And these same sort of methodologies are really intended to help grow sales or grow the pie in downtown. One of the things that I've been reading recently, and this relates to supporting business growth, is the fact that because of some of the business issues associated with the pandemic, one of the optimistic scenarios is that there's a real expectation that within the next 5 years that there's going to be sort of a backlog of entrepreneurial growth, which for downtowns is really going to be very important because these small businesses that are starting up or early stage are really important prospective tenants, and being positioned to encourage them to come to the downtown is going to be key. Next slide. The short-term market recommendations are really described in detail in the report. I'm kind of going to go over that in a top line basis, but essentially the first 3 points that are shown on this slide really define that issue of collaboration, commitment, and communication. And in terms of each of the key downtown players, the city, the RDA, the New Merchants Group, the Chamber, and others, identifying those roles and responsibilities going forward for revitalizing this downtown is going to be really important. And working that out together is going to be key. The other thing that I want to mention too is that as part of that, there be a unified commitment to the downtown based on those roles and responsibilities. And working that out as part of the same process is going to be key too. The other thing is identifying a downtown champion. And this is something that when we're talking about these conversations and the roles and responsibilities, an initial champion really needs to be identified as part of that process. And that's really someone or something that's going to encourage and make sure that people do what they commit to doing as part of the process. And this role will essentially evolve over time. It's not necessarily going to be static. Because as you'll see on the next slide, there's going to be some descriptions about that. The other thing is going to be having a focused message about who does what will be critical. And this gets to that communication issue that I mentioned earlier, because the message will be critical in communicating between the stakeholders and also in communicating with potential investors. We talked a little bit about businesses that may want to come to the downtown. The RDA is focused on attracting development in the downtown, and all of those things need to receive a similar message. And this also relates to the business community, because sharing messages that support the idea of a future focus and a commitment to downtown is something that's going to need to be part of what they have to say to their customers too. Another issue is from the public sector side. Are there real ways to improve the local processes so that they work best for both sectors? And obviously the goal in this is really understandable processes that support investment. That means good understandable regulations and processes that both protect current investment and enable quality in the future. And it also encompasses looking at incentives and how they can be strengthened to improve downtown buildings, their economics, and those appearance issues that came up so dramatically within the survey results. And then finally, related to all of this is really working together with the merchants group and considering issues. Extending hours obviously was one that was top of mind at the time a lot of this was coming down, but there may be other examples of collaboration based on what's happening now in downtown Stoughton that may be slightly more top of mind. And I talked a little bit in the report about the issue of hours and that it is a complicated issue, and really thinking that through and addressing it is going to be important over the next few years. Next slide. Essentially the recommendations shown here, which are the 5 years or more versus the now that I just described, and they really represent next steps from the previous set of recommendations. They include formal business recruitment once you have that kind of system in place. There's also the opportunity when we're talking about the evolution of the downtown champion. Can you consider a standalone organizational structure that's focused on downtown and how that could be a financially sustainable organization that's going to advocate for downtown interests? As part of that, when you're talking about formal structure, you need benchmarks to manage success, and identifying any sort of initiatives that could enhance the experience would be part of what that organization would do, but part of what they would do in partnership with others. Also, similarly, marketing and media materials and how that evolves over time should be the part and parcel of that, because you're going to want to look at what your market positioning and branding is. And then the other thing is, the final 2 points are really about monitoring your progress. And one thing that downtowns don't necessarily do and should is really evaluate their events annually, because sometimes they're more effective than others. Sometimes they lose their effectiveness. Sometimes they need to change. Those things need to be considered. And then finally, related to the whole issue of benchmarking, is continuing to monitor what is happening downtown, identifying those sort of metrics that are important to your downtown and your community, and ensuring that you're adapting to what you're seeing as change among those, so that you can really continue your progress. And with that, Bruce.
All right, we'll see if I can get it to work now.
Okay, did you get a pop-up, Bruce?
It popped up. And I pop up now. Show here. And of course, it's buried under the. There it goes. You see it?
Great.
Okay. I thought I had it set to the right spot. I told everyone to set their things to the right spot. And then it didn't work for me. I apologize for that. That's what I get for trying to do something fancy with two machines and I got the wrong one up, but that's all right. So I'm talking about the physical improvements. Diane talked about all the kind of the business end. I think they're really related. There's different types of physical improvements. They're the ones that are public improvements and private improvements. And based off the surveys and public input that we took, one of the things that rose to the top was streetscape improvements. That was ranked really high if you look at, besides the business was ranked the highest, but after that it came to streetscape. And I think a lot of that ties into the vibrancy that they want to have. They're trying to get a street that's more vibrant. Other areas that we were talked about were kind of wayfinding and branding improvements, and then kind of the infill and redevelopment opportunities, and finally parking, which I've never been involved in a community where parking has not been an issue. Always there. We're going to talk about streetscape improvements first. So I think a lot of the streetscape improvements kind of go back to the vibrant community and also trying to get people to stay longer. I mean, if you think about a streetscape without trees and a hot day, you may want to eat out lunch outside, but if it's not shady, you're not going to spend much time there. You're not going to walk around in the heat of the day. And so I think trees provide that opportunity for comfort. They also help bring the scale down and are consistent with your downtown, a nice pedestrian scale. So street trees rose to the top as an important aspect. You have some nice trees along Main Street. The idea here was to fill in with more trees and actually expand them into some of the outside streets. Another thing, keeping with the scale of the downtown, was to improve your lighting situation that's out there, your streetscape lighting, and make it a pedestrian scale and something that went with the character of the site better over time. We have some nice wide sidewalks on Main Street. They're well used. We'll talk more about the sidewalk use later on. But on some of your other streets that connect downtown to the neighboring areas and neighboring parks, those streets are a little narrower. So there are recommendations to improve some of those sidewalk widths. Within the downtown, some of the sidewalk widths, we'll talk about how you use your sidewalk to make it more effective. Another thing that happened more on the side streets than on the main street was to provide a landscape terrace. Some of your streets come right up to the sidewalk. The sidewalk and road are very connected, provides some separation, and also allows room for more trees. And then everyone loves the ugly power lines above the ground. It's makes a huge difference in moving a power line underground in a community. So that was another one of the recommendations in the streetscape end. So here's an example of the streetscape. We did streetscape vignettes for 3 different streets, Main Street and some of the side streets. This is the main streetscape. You can see in this scenario, we kind of divide the streetscape up to make it function. We kind of have this cafe or frontage area. People could do some individual decorations out there if that's allowable by your laws and rules, or could evolve over time. And there's, more importantly, is the cafe seating. It's a great opportunity for people to run into neighbors, be seen, see people. Then we have this walking zone to work with, and kind of the outside zone is furnishing and landscaping. So we did this for all the different street vignettes. Those are all in the report to talk about how those can get improved. Off to the side, we show some just samples of lights. These are not chosen lights. They're just to represent there's a scale that's pedestrian, a scale that's street side. The upper image talks about the importance of trees. And this is trying to show there's ways to make your trees better. There's studies out there that show like you can improve your profit on buildings. Sales go up by 9% in well-shaded streetscapes over non-shaded streetscapes. And one of the ways to do that is to provide a good environment for trees. And this is providing a good environment for trees, what this is all about, that image. We also have the wayfinding recommendations. You guys have a wayfinding system now. It's a little difficult to read based on text sizes, but the other benefit of a wayfinding situation is it helps develop a brand. It gives you some identity that's repeated throughout the block. You can see in the sign here, the 100 block, that sort of theme can go throughout and connect a district together. We have the wayfinding kiosk, so it shows pedestrians what are happening. The wayfinding issues also tell you things that are outside the street. People frequently say, well, we don't need wayfinding, we all have our GPS. Well, first of all, I miss turns on my GPS all the time on my phone for some reason. I can't figure that out, but I still do. And the streetscape signs, the wayfinding signs will still tell you activities as you go through town. You may be just going through town, but there might be an arrow to your park off to the side that you don't know about. So next time through, or you might be driving through, oh, let's go see what that's out. So there are some other reasons for the wayfinding sign. Another thing is that the gateway markers, they can tell you when you're entering a new district. And wayfinding content can be a wide variety. There can be online content as well. Infill development is, we all want our town to succeed. Improvements happen with success. We've all seen the towns that had beautiful brick buildings that are now covered in metal or other materials. We think you need to develop a system to promote to tell people what needs to be built or how something is built, some guidance and standards to follow so you have the property you want. We also looked at opportunities of where this infill can have, what buildings need improvement. Diane mentioned some facade improvement. That would be some of this, what those facade improvements might be. The other thing is how can we promote or have better parking, but not have parking the main influence. It's much better to have a structure of a downtown like you guys have. You have a great structure compared to most communities. You have 5 solid blocks of building, and most communities don't even have that. Even the community that says Madison has very few areas in neighboring their 5 blocks. And we don't want to break that up with parking if we can avoid it, or the ways to put parking in the back and not make it so dominant, but still make it very convenient. So we want to look at ways to make parking more in the interior blocks instead of taking up prime real estate that could make your town more pleasant and also great business sites. In parking, there's different recommendations, different types of parking that were the issue with this. One issue was conduct a general overall parking study. Is there enough parking? Is the parking in the right spot? We may have tons of parking, but it's where no one needs to be, then it's not effective parking. And the other thing is the controls. There's in the survey talked about the parking being too short. And that could be a real problem. The idea for downtown to be successful is to get people to stay longer. And if we have everyone leaving at an hour or 2 because of parking, that may not be an effective method. So parking control is the other thing to look at. We want to talk about how new development is parked. We want new development. We talked about the infill development on a previous slide. Where does that new development park? Is it underground parking? Is it surface parking? How does that work? We also want to consider different modes of transportation. There's a bike share program. You guys have some paths around town. You have some parks that are in easy distance to your downtown. Is there a way for a bike share program that could link these better? Or now there's other opportunities to improve travel, such as trolleys for special events. It may be able to help you promote some areas of your downtown that aren't working. You have the far east side that was highlighted as being a red and needing more improvement as their way to improve the connection between the core downtown and some of the outlying areas. So those are things we're going to look at. So then we kind of tried to look at all these things together. So this is kind of street layout. There's a hierarchy of streets. There's a big pedestrian connection, especially Main Street, with Main Street that's wide sidewalks and dining. How do we promote that dining? How do we make the connections into the neighborhood, into business uses, parks? Then we can look at ways for parking. So where can parking go? Where can gateway signs go to help have you enter into the town? Plaza space be to allow you to activate your downtown space? Creating a vibrant community was one of the main goals that came up. Then we throw a layer of redevelopment. And how does these redevelopment areas start to relate to parking areas? And we throw it all together into a spot, a single graph. We see all four of those big items together: the redevelopment, the parking, the streetscape. And we see problems with that, and we finalize it into more of a master plan. Within the master plan, we have the main curve downtown with outdoor dining, enhanced intersections to promote pedestrian crossing and traffic. We have a few plaza spaces within that, or flex spaces that we can turn into parking and plaza, depending on the time of day. We infill with buildings where there are voids. We take buildings that could be revamped and revitalized, are marked on there in the dark black color. We have our interior lots. We look at some other public open spaces a little farther off the site, off of Jefferson Street there, where we have the pedestrian bridge today. Can we activate that space? There's some talk of wanting to have spaces for music nearby. So there's a spot there near the river, near downtown. Can we somehow activate that space into a master plan? So that's a lot to do. And where do we start? So right now, we can start to look at light standards. So as things get replaced, we have a light standard that we want to use. The other idea was, especially now, outdoor dining with COVID has taken off like crazy. And how can we define and use the outdoor dining? How can we make a zone? How do those spaces operate? Are there other opportunities for bigger dining spaces? Can we use a parking lot into a dining space at off-hour times? We look at the crosswalk enhancement as an early opportunity to help signal this is a pedestrian zone. If we want infill development, we have to start by meeting with developers, courting developers. Everyone wants development. Developers need some sort of incentive to come, well, not necessarily money incentive, but they need to understand the community and see the benefits of your community. And so we need to court those developers. But we don't want them building just anything. So we want to set up some design standards so we get the product that's consistent with the desires of the community. We can also try to increase some activity in downtown, provide the bike share opportunity, and see if we can do some research to see if there's a need for a trolley for events to help the events be more effective and spread the traffic to a broader section of the area. Over the next 5 years, plus, we want to continue to increase the street trees. We have a light standard, and as the roads get replaced and things happen, we can increase the lights, increase sidewalk widths and terraces. That's all. A great time to do all that is when you do reconstruction. So you can plan in advance as roads get reconstructed or need to be reconstructed. How can we put in our wider sidewalks, our lights, our landscape terrace? Are there ways to underground those utilities? Think ahead about undergrounding utilities, make people connections so it's easier to underground the overhead lines. we have to think we could start to put in the gateway markers to announce the entrance to your community. You've got a great opportunity for an entrance on each side. I love it as you're coming in that kind of little snake road or just over the railroad track. You're in residential area, you turn that little curve, and all of a sudden the downtown opens up. You see the Opera House kind of sticking up over the buildings. Can we improve our bed head bike connections? You have that bridge already over the river. Can we strengthen that connection? You have neighborhoods surrounding your downtown, which is great to have people there. And these people have, from the survey and results that we've had, they're younger people with families. They want to come to downtown. Let's make it easier for them to get to downtown. We can continue with wayfinding. We do a wayfinding study, then move that forward and start to implement that study. Move the parking to the back, get the buildings up going, complete our parking study, and then have a methodology to bring parking in when we do new developments so we don't make our parking problem worse. So we'd like to thank you for having us work on this project. I think that Stoughton is a really unique community in terms of its cultural heritage, its growth right now. I think it's pretty forward thinking about how it's trying to move forward. It's not just letting things happen. Things are going to change. You have a lot of good small businesses in downtown that can be grown, and they'll be the key to the future success of downtown, is having a reason for people to come there. The plan is made to be a guide to move you forward. It will change over time, but you need to look to the guide for recommendations as a playbook. And overall, I think the biggest thing you have in Stoughton is the commitment of people, and that's what you really need. The number of people who came out for the surveys, as Diane mentioned, was very high. And the number of responses and the type of responses on those surveys. You normally don't get people who fill in written responses at the end of a survey. There were paragraphs, and they weren't all just complaining paragraphs. I think it was very constructive criticism. So you got a great core of citizens to help the process move forward. And with that, I think we're ready for questions.
Okay, so I only had one question come in over the chat, and it was just a request to expand a little bit on, I believe it's slide 10, where it says examine city approval / licensing process. Were there any specific ones that you noted or anything you can expand on there?
I don't think that there were necessarily any specific ones. The sense was, in talking with primarily the commercial interests, is that sometimes they felt that there was a lack of consistency, and that some of the regs that applied specifically to downtown businesses or properties may need an update. It was less of a criticism and more about how you move things forward, would be how I would describe it. And I don't have any really good specific examples. Probably if there was one thing that would fall broadly in that realm, and Bruce just mentioned it, was the 2-hour parking thing. But you know, as far as any specifics, that's the case. But I think that, you know, assuming you begin conversations with those commercial interests downtown, I think they'll be very direct in telling you what those issues are. So.
Okay. Thank you. We did have another one, just kind of requesting to expand on the issues around retail hours and how to improve on being welcoming to all. Any suggestions you have there?
I think the hours is a complicated issue, and I addressed that essentially in the report, because a lot of communities want to change their hours, or it comes up as an issue. The reason specific to Stoughton, and I think some of the merchants are aware of it at this point, is that particularly with the age 25 to 44 cohort, which I think was something like 37% of the survey respondents, those are folks who, if you're closing your store, can't make it there by 5 or 6 o'clock. And every store owner has to be open the hours that work, but changing hours also is a task, and it takes a lot of education and a long time. So I think the issue is taking a look at, are there other ways to do that, or what are the ways that may work best for the Stoughton businesses? And there was another part to the question. What was that?
Just kind of expand on, or provide some suggestions you've seen in terms of being welcoming to all.
Oh, I think a lot of times, and I heard this to some degree from some of the downtown business owners, and that there's a focus on visitors coming to downtown and visitors being really important to downtown. And the truth is, everybody's important as a potential consumer. And probably the biggest selling point for most downtowns and downtown businesses is if you have a very committed group of, a very committed have very committed residents that believe in your downtown, and they're the people who are out there in addition to visitors that are also customers. Their dollars are also green, and it's really all groups that you want. And I think that when you're looking separately at being competitive within the region, recognizing that the region is younger and more diverse perhaps than Stoughton as a whole, if you're going to capture more of those regional dollars, you need to be open to all people as customers. So
I have a similar question, if that's okay. I have a similar question, and that is, I've heard at least some people talk to me about whether or not our Chamber of Commerce is working closely enough with downtown businesses, and whether or not their focus should be more on business and less on commercial enterprises. And did you hear any of that feedback from the people who responded?
yeah, and I think that this gets to essentially the distinction between sort of chamber interests and what I'm terming the downtown champion, which essentially would be, someone or something identified to advocate on behalf of downtown. The chamber's role really is as an area organization that reflects and advocates on behalf of their members. Some of their members may be downtown, but I think that gets to the question that I mentioned about understanding the roles and responsibilities. I think that it's unclear to a lot of folks who's supposed to be doing what. And I think when we're talking about focusing on the future for downtown, everybody needs to understand what their role is. That the chamber certainly does have a role in that, but I guess, are they the lead entity? And that's something that you and the collective interests there have to decide on your own.
So how, just a follow-up question, and that is, should there be the businesses basically uniting more with each other in a specialized way? would that be helpful?
Well, there has been some, at least, I know there's been some discussion among the downtown businesses about forming their own group, which I think makes sense for them to form something to work together, to collaborate and to advocate for their own interests and perhaps do events that really benefit all of them. I think that they need to also do that in the context of a relationship with the chamber, and that gets to the collaboration issue that I talked about.
Thank you.
Let's see, we just had another one come through. It's a question to keep revitalization moving forward. What can we do to learn from other communities? Are there other communities we should visit or outside leaders that can come and provide us clear-cut examples of completed projects?
I think some of that is really detailed in terms of the best practices for you, specific to Stoughton, and those were actually communities that were identified as part of the input process. I would suggest that before you actually go to visit other communities is that you understand how the private and the public sectors can collaborate in Stoughton to start. And I think then seeking input from other communities would be useful.
Okay, that's all I have for now coming through the chat boxes. We can go ahead and open it up if anybody wants to comment verbally and see if we can have a conversation. Otherwise, we'll wrap things up. So does anybody have anything they want to say or ask the team while they're here?
Thank you. Great presentation.
Okay, I guess that might be it. You can see we have the last slide up here. Everybody's contact information is there. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and email them. We do have the entire plan up at the Stoughton RDA website. WSTO has recorded this, so we'll be putting it on at a minimum the Stoughton RDA website, the actual presentation itself tonight. And in the meantime, if you have any questions, go ahead and reach out to any of these folks, or you can call me directly as well. Last call for comments, questions, concerns.
I just want to thank, this is Bruce, I want to thank you guys for hiring Heirs and DDI. We enjoyed working with you.
Yes, it was a great project.
We wish we could have done this presentation in person, but there's a lot of things we want to do in person that we haven't.
Yeah.
So.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, I think you need to add to the appendix the information Diane gave us on pandemic resources. That's my only suggestion on the report at this time.
Okay, we'll do that. I thought I did, but maybe we didn't. Maybe we just sent it. I thought we added that appendix, but if not, we'll do it.
Well, when I looked at the table of contents, I didn't see it on it. So, maybe I wasn't looking at the most recent report.
We'll check. No problem.
Okay, thank you.
This is Sharon Mason Boersma. Can everybody hear me?
Mhm.
Okay, good. I just want to thank all of you again from Heirs and also Jamin for this meeting tonight. I'm real excited about, again, downtown revitalization, and I continue to learn, as we all do. And especially since the pandemic, this is even more meaningful for me and for our community. So again, I want to thank all of you for your input and for your work.
Okay, logistically, does anyone know, do we actually have to officially adjourn a committee of the whole meeting?
Yes.
Okay, can I get a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second.
I'll give it to Lisa. Okay. So we are adjourned.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Thank you all.